In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, present in all places, filling all things, treasury of blessings, giver of life, come and abide in us. Cleanse us from all impurity, and save our souls, O good one. Lord our God, we thank you for being with us, for bringing us together. Help us to open our minds to you. Help us to open up our hearts to you. Help us to learn. Help us to grow. Help us to continue to grow as we prepare to welcome you into this world, to celebrate your nativity. Help us to prepare to welcome you into our hearts, into our lives. Help us to make good choices, to learn how to build better habits, to continue to draw closer to you always in all aspects of our lives. We ask this of you, O Lord, together with your Father, who is without beginning, and your all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and forever, into the ages of ages. So tonight is about habits, right? And I think like habits, it's probably a good time to talk about habits too, because we're at the beginning of like a Lenten season as well. And we can approach the Lenten season with, I want to be good about fasting this year. I want to be good about saying my prayers, whatever it is. And that's sometimes like easier said than done. So I think this is a particularly good time to talk about some of the, what does it mean to set good habits? What are the things that sometimes get in the way? And I think we all have things that get in the way. If you're curious, this actually is something that we covered in an episode of B2B, which is a video series that we do, as Andres mentioned. It's episode 143. You can always just kind of have that written down if you ever want to come back and kind of like think about it again or watch an episode like that. You can always check that out. But anyway, habits, right? When we think about habits, sometimes the first thing that I think of is like resolutions. How many of you have ever set like a New Year's resolution or some sort of goal for yourselves? Right? I think all of us have. How many of you have struggled to keep that resolution or that goal, right? There's a lot of data that suggests that, what was the last article that I saw about this? By like, I think as early as January 15th or something, like 40 to 50% of people have already like failed on their New Year's goals, right? Like things crash and burn pretty quickly. I'm going to start going to the gym more often. And then you go like twice and then like I'm sore and then I never go again, right? But you're still paying the gym membership. Or I'm going to eat better and then like you get a kale salad one day and then you stop. Or I'm going to say my prayers before I go to bed and you do it like 2 or 3 times. And then the 4th night you're just tired and you go to bed and then like everything is ruined, right? It's hard. It's really hard to make changes in our lives. There's a lot of momentum and a lot of inertia that just keeps us stuck in whatever sort of situation we've been in the past. And I think it's because we don't know what we're doing. I think we have this kind of sense that we can just sort of like willpower our way through things. And willpower is a finite resource. Like there's a reason why it's sometimes easier to make good choices earlier in the day than later in the day. Like willpower is a finite resource and it's hard to just sort of depend upon that to sort of like will your way into better habits. What I want to talk about is like how our brains work and what we can understand about like our own sort of motivations with a little bit of kind of theological gloss on it as well, to understand like what is going on in our brains, what is going on in our hearts. What are some things that we can keep in mind as we determine, like, here are some good habits that I want to cultivate, right? And like we said, now is a good time because here we are at the beginning of a period of preparation, right? We're theoretically fasting more. We're theoretically praying more. It's not as intense as like the one before Pascha, certainly, but, there are moments where we can go to church more and like that can all be really hard. Or it can be really easy for like 2 or 3 days and then we ended up falling on our faces again. So why? Why is it so hard to build these good habits? What exactly is going on? There's a very simple sort of mechanism that goes on in the way that the human psyche works. It's kind of a 3-step process that really like it undergirds a lot of our habits. There's a cue, there's a routine, and there's a reward. And I think if we're going to understand ourselves, it's helpful to understand like this little dance that happens within us. Cue, routine, reward. What do I mean by this? Simple example. Let's say you're having a conversation with people and the conversation lulls for whatever reason. What is the first thing that we tend to do when we're hanging out with people and there's like a moment of quiet? We tend to take out our phones and start scrolling, right? I feel like that's one of those just kind of things that we do, like break in the conversation. I don't know what to do with my hands. I stick my hand in my pocket, get my phone, and just sort of distract myself. And you get that little dopamine hit, right? Because like our phones are designed by people who make like slot machines, and you get a little chemical burst in your brain. The cue, right, is a lull in the conversation. The routine is at some point without thinking about it, you go to your pocket to get your phone, and the reward is the little dopamine hit that you get. And if you think about it, think about maybe from a negative point of view. Think about every bad habit that you struggle with. Every bad habit that you struggle with follows this simple little framework. There's a cue, there's a routine, and there's a reward. That could mean as simple as like every time I walk into the kitchen, I open up the refrigerator and I get a snack, right? The cue is walk into the kitchen. The routine is without even thinking, I open up the refrigerator, and the reward is the tasty little snack that I have. The cue could be every time I sit on the couch, I turn on the TV, right? Cue, sit on the couch, routine, turn on the TV, reward is I get the distraction of being on the TV, right? Any sort of like bad habit you have, like, and I think especially when it comes to like the deeper sort of struggles that we have, the really kind of bad habits that like borderline on addictions, there's some level of cue that like at some point just leads to an automatic response, a routine, and there's a reward that comes out of it. And that's really the thing. The trouble with, and the difference between bad habits and good habits is that bad habits are unhealthy ways to get some sort of reward that we're trying to get at, right? Bad habits are unhealthy ways of addressing some human need that we have. We all have needs, physical needs, emotional needs, spiritual needs, psychological needs. Bad habits are unhealthy ways of meeting those needs. Simple example, right? That cue, like I walk into the whatchamacallit, the kitchen, and I open up a refrigerator and I get a snack. There's a need that's probably there that motivates that like unnecessary snacking, right? It's probably not hunger that leads us to just sort of like have you ever just eaten when you're bored, right? Have you ever eaten when you're sad? Have you ever eaten when you're lonely? Putting food in your mouth does not address sadness, does not address loneliness, does not address boredom, does not address any of that. But there's a need in our hearts. And sometimes because we're not aware of what's actually going on, we try to meet those needs in kind of dumb, unhealthy ways. So if we're going to understand ourselves, it's actually a question of understanding like, what is the need that I have, that I'm experiencing in my heart right now? What is the thing that I want but don't have? And how can I satisfy that need in a healthy sort of way rather than an unhealthy sort of way, right? Because when I'm going to the refrigerator to get a snack at random times, or to get a snack when I'm sad, or to get a snack when I'm bored, or whatever it is, like I'm not hungry. I'm not hungry. I'm sad, or I'm bored, or I'm lonely, or whatever. If I'm actually going to move away from that destructive behavior, from that bad habit, I have to kind of understand what is the need that I'm trying to fill with that random cookie. Am I eating something because I'm like, again, I'm feeling something? If I understand what I'm feeling, then I can actually address it. I'm sad. Oh, I should understand why I'm sad and do something to cheer me up. Or I'm lonely. I should reach out to somebody instead of just going to get a snack, right? Like, do you see what I mean? There are deep needs in our lives that we just kind of tend to go about meeting in an unhealthy way. And that's really the difference between good habits and bad habits. We don't really understand ourselves. And it's like, it's not a question of like, just willpowering ourselves to stop doing something. It's really about pumping the brakes very slightly and kind of developing a sense of understanding, like what's the reward that I'm actually seeking? What is the reward? What is the need, the deep need that I have in my life that the reward is apparently going to fill? And if I can understand that, then I can sort of go backwards and figure out like, okay, what is a new cycle of cue, routine, reward that I can create, as opposed to the negative cycle that I've created. I've tried to think about this, and there's kind of 5 basic things that I want to suggest to you that are ways to think about this going forward. And again, I'm going to leave you here and then we can kind of talk about it. But 5 ways to sort of like now understanding that cue, routine, reward cycle. How can we go about building better habits? And that means everything from prayer rules to going to the gym more to whatever, right? Just like better ways of dealing with ourselves. Tip number 1, start small and start easy. Sometimes when we're trying to create new habits, we bite off more than we can chew, which is the reason why they fall flat, right? Like, I'm going to go to the gym 5 times a week and I'm going to lift 400 pounds over my head. And then you go to the gym twice and nothing happens. Or I'm going to pray for half an hour every night before I go to bed. Or I'm going to pray for an hour and do a full service. And you're 30 seconds into it and you can barely sort of like concentrate anymore. We do too much. We do too much. And because we do too much, we're relying on willpower rather than on wisdom, and things don't actually work out. But here's the good news. Starting small makes a difference. There are these things that researchers have studied, and they're called keystone habits. Keystone habits are little things that actually open up the door to bigger things in our lives. Little wins in our lives that open up the door to bigger wins. Little changes that open up the door to bigger changes. For example, right, this is something that researchers have seen. People who exercise also tend to eat healthy foods and make other healthy choices. One good choice tends to open up the door to other good choices, right? One small good choice opens up the door to another smaller good choice, et cetera, et cetera. And it sort of goes. Another classic thing that you might have heard about before, people who write down their goals actually tend to follow them more than people who don't. Like, that's a simple little thing that you can do, writing them down, creating a sense of accountability for yourself that actually opens up the door to following through with those goals more likely than you could. So if you're trying to make a goal for yourself, especially now at the beginning of this preparation for the Nativity, start small. You don't have to bite off more than you can chew, right? If you're thinking of a prayer goal for yourself, your prayer goal can be as simple as like, every morning when I wake up, I'm going to say the Our Father. And that's it. And that's fine. That's fine. Because life is more about like consistency than about doing one amazing thing for one day and then never doing it again, right? If you want to sort of like a charitable goal for yourself, like, I'm going to carry a $5 in my pocket, and anytime somebody needs those $5, I'm going to give those $5, right? You're not like giving 10% of your money to a charity or whatever it is, but you're doing like one thing that you can actually start doing now. And that consistency like of small step forward actually opens the door to other things. So start small. Don't like overthink what you can do. Don't be, because that all comes from like guilt. That all comes from shame. That all comes from a lot of negative things. Like, I'm not praying enough. I have to be praying more, or I'm not fasting enough, whatever it is. Like, what can you actually do? And if you focus on what you can actually do, you will do it, and then open up the door to better things down the road. So number one, from the very beginning, start small and start easy. Don't make it hard on yourself. Number two, in terms of good habits, come up with solutions for problems ahead of time. What do I mean by this? Anytime we set goals for ourselves, like we said, stuff gets in the way, right? I'm going to say, like, even a simple little prayer for myself. I'm going to say the Our Father every morning when I wake up. But what happens when you oversleep? And suddenly you feel pressure and you feel like you have no time for this, right? I'm going to, I don't know, eat better at lunch. What happens when you don't have time to actually eat at all during lunch, right? Your whole, like, you best laid plans end up getting messed up, right? There's a study that was done in Scotland, which actually like suggests a way around this attempts to plan ahead. So there's this study that was done in Scotland, which tracked how people recovered after surgery, right? Something like knee surgery, like, for example, where you have to keep moving so the knee can begin rehabilitating and you can sort of get out of the wheelchair and start walking again. The problem is, as you might imagine, if you know anybody who's had surgery can be really painful, especially as you get older, right? If you have a grandparent who had knee surgery or whatever it is, like, it can be really easy to stay in bed and not recover because you're not like rehabilitating and recuperating and so forth and so on. But what this study found, two interesting things. One, the people who began to like write down their goals recovered about twice as fast as people who didn't. Like we said before, they did something simple, right? I'm going to walk for half an hour a day or whatever it is. And they were twice as likely to do it as others did. But the even greater difference, even more than that, the patients who made the most progress the fastest were the ones who thought about, like, what happens in those difficult situations? What happens in those difficult situations where it might be hard? Like, what happens when I have to go to the bathroom at night and I can't get a hold of somebody to like help me and I can't walk on my knee or whatever it is? Or what happens when I'm running late to an appointment and I have to get to a bus stop? They thought about obstacles ahead of time and had a plan for dealing with those obstacles, because obstacles can slow us down, right? So like prayer example, I wake up, I say every morning I'm gonna like pray when I wake up, and I'm late one day. I can have a contingency plan about that, right? Say my plan is to like say the Lord's Prayer every morning, but I wake up late one day. You know what? Days that I wake up late, I'm at least going to sort of do my cross in front of my icon. I have a plan B, as opposed to not doing anything, right? When sometimes like obstacles happen, we tend to abandon our plans entirely and panic and be frantic and worry about being late or worrying about being whatever, right? Like life throws curveballs at you. There are going to be moments when you oversleep in the morning. There are going to be days when you feel incredibly overwhelmed by school or home or whatever it is, right? So when you set a goal for yourself, be honest that there are going to be days when things are not going to go great. Your schedule is not going to be ideal. What happens at a time like that? I want to say my prayer every morning when I wake up. I know there are going to be days when I oversleep, but here's my plan B. I'm at least going to do my cross, as opposed to like scrambling in that moment and doing nothing. And that actually sort of like being honest with ourselves, again, just opens up the door to success. Because instead of it being this all or nothing thing, there's like grace that we give to ourselves. I overslept today. That's okay. I can still do something. I can still give God a moment of my time, even if I can't give him the full 5 minutes that I wanted to give, or whatever it is, right? Instead of landing on your rear end because your day suddenly feels frantic. Like, I've thought about this before. This is what happens when I oversleep. This is what happens when I have too much homework. This is what happens when I feel too tired at the end of the day, whatever it is, because all those things happen. So just take a little bit of time and be realistic with yourself and forgive yourself and plan ahead a little bit. So you can have, if the day is not ideal, there's at least something you can do to keep moving forward in the right direction. Number 3, give yourself rewards for good activities. What do I mean by that? Do you remember that cycle that we talked about? That cue, routine, reward cycle? Everything that we do in our lives anticipates some kind of reward. Everything. Even our bad habits, right? Our bad habits are giving us some kind of like bad reward. That I walk into the kitchen and I routinely open up the refrigerator and I grab a snack, right? The reward is the snack. You can't just sort of like go cold turkey. That just doesn't work, right? Because the heart, the mind, the brain, all these parts of ourselves are still looking for some kind of reward. And you can't just take rewards completely away. You have to replace a bad reward with a good reward. So think about that simple example of like, I have this bad habit of like snacking too much. Maybe you just sort of like realize, okay, my every time I walk into the kitchen, I open up the refrigerator and I get a snack. Maybe I'm just going to make sure that the refrigerator is full of apples instead of like other kinds of snacks. So I'm going to get an apple instead of whatever, right? I'm going to get something that's a little bit on the healthier side, right? I still need a reward. Like I still want something. I'm going to give myself something good as opposed to something bad. Or on a deeper level, you can actually begin doing the difficult work of figuring out like, what do you actually want in your life, right? When you're going to snack, are you snacking because you feel lonely in that moment, right? Are you snacking because you feel bored in that moment? Like maybe you don't need an apple. Maybe you need a friend. Maybe you don't need an apple. Maybe you need a hobby, right? Maybe you don't, right? Like what's actually going on inside? It's not just about sort of like willing ourselves to do better. It's about being honest with ourselves. Like, what do I need at this moment in my life? And if we can understand, like, here are the difficulties, right? Like, here's the reward or the need that this bad reward is actually meeting. Let me replace it with a good reward. And the better that you will, the more honest you can be about yourself, the more like helpful that reward will be, right? Think about that phone example too. Like anytime there's a lull in the conversation, we just take out our phones and we start scrolling aimlessly, right? Why do we do that? Why do we do that? Like, what is the need that is actually being met in that moment? Do you just feel kind of awkward in that moment? Do you feel lonely in that moment. And sometimes we can feel lonely when we're with other people, which causes us to like, disengage, to look at our phone as opposed to being with the people around us. Like, what's actually going on? If you can understand the need that you're experiencing in that moment, you can satisfy that need in a healthy sort of way. I'm lonely right now. Let me actually, instead of like just going like scrolling on my phone, let me call up a friend that I haven't talked to in a while, or text a friend that I haven't talked to in a while, as opposed to just sort of like randomly scrolling on Instagram or whatever it is, right? Because that's the need. 20 minutes of aimless scrolling is not going to fill that need. I just need a friend right now. Do you see the difference? You can't just like say no to things. You have to figure out like what is the hole in my life and how can I fill that hole with something positive as opposed to negative? And then you can sort of reverse engineer that, right? So when I instantly like, or like, let's say I'm bored, right? I'm bored. So that's why I go to my phone. Okay. Well, if you're bored, maybe be creative. When you take out your phone, open up a notes app and start writing a poem, or pull up a little app and start like making a little doodle or something. I don't know. Like if you're bored, be creative. What is 20 minutes of scrolling going to do for you, or an hour of scrolling going to do for you, right? Think about like, you're bored, be creative. If you're lonely, like connect with a friend. What's the need that's actually going on? If you can be honest about that need, you can create rewards for yourself that will actually create good habits, or at least better habits. Number 4, focus on building good habits, not breaking bad habits. This is, I think, where a lot of us go wrong, because we think about things in negative terms. We think about all the bad things that we need to stop, right? But like we said before, that's not easy, right? That's not starting small, which violates our first rule. And it also doesn't offer a reward, which violates our third rule, to just stop whatever bad habit we're doing. On a deeper level, that's not how theology works. It's not how theology works. There's this 20th century saint, Saint Porphyrios, who was a saint on Mount Athos and a very modern, really wonderful saint. He has this beautiful image that I think is really helpful here. He says, imagine a room that is totally dark, right? The lights are off, the curtains are drawn, it's totally dark. If I give you a shovel, can you use that shovel to remove the darkness from the room? Of course not. No matter how much you sweat, you're not going to get the darkness out of that room. How do you get the darkness out of that room? You let in a little bit of light, right? You flip on the light switch, or if it's daylight outside, you open up the curtains and you let in a little bit of light, and a single ray of light breaks the darkness in that room. Progress is made in our lives, not when we like focus obsessively on stopping bad things, but when we like zealously and joyously and courageously fill our lives with better things, with good things. The best way for us to go forward is not to like be guilty about ourselves and think about all the bad things that I want to stop doing. It's what are good things that I can start doing instead, right? Not, okay, fine, I spend too much time like aimlessly on my phone or whatever it is. Like, okay, but what can I actually do that's good? What can I do that like captures my imagination? What can I read more? Can I work out more? Can I pray more? Can I spend more time with family members? Whatever it is. What are positive things that I can fill my life with, as opposed to feeling the shame and the guilt and all these negative things about cutting bad things out? You can't fight against darkness. You can't. Instead, you have to pursue the light. You have to fill your life with light. And a healthy life is going to be a life that is full of better choices and better habits. And if we, again, understand that rhythm, that cue, routine, response, reward sort of rhythm, we can begin to use that to sort of like design better cycles for ourselves, to fill our lives with better choices, better habits, things that are going to make us spiritually more healthy, physically more healthy, emotionally more healthy, etc. But that doesn't happen by fighting and obsessing about the bad stuff we have to stop. It's about joyously thinking about what are the good things that I should start, or the good things that I should do more of. And number 5, believe you can do better. Like so many times when it comes to our spiritual lives or just life in general, we get really down on ourselves and we think that change is impossible. We think that making better choices is impossible. There's a lot of interesting research on a very difficult place in life. Alcoholics Anonymous, right? People who struggle with like a very powerful addiction. Alcoholism is the thing that ruins the lives of so many people. But people have gone and studied, what is it like, why is it that Alcoholics Anonymous groups, for example, help people deal with like a very, very serious bad habit, a very serious bad addiction? Because it's a community of people that constantly remind each other that this isn't the end, and that you can be better, and that you have support around you to do better. Like, this is why the people that we surround ourselves with are so important. Because we get down on ourselves sometimes. We lose faith in ourselves. We need somebody to cheer us up. It's important to try to connect ourselves as much as possible with people who can remind us of who we are when we lose our way. People who can remind us that we are loved, right? We are created by God. We are chosen in this beautiful sort of way. And yes, we all make mistakes. Yes, we all fall into bad habits, but each and every one of us is bigger than our biggest mistake. And we forget that sometimes. We associate ourselves. We define other people sometimes by their biggest mistakes, and we define ourselves sometimes by our biggest mistakes. But we can do better. We can make better choices. We can enter into a positive cycle as opposed to this negative cycle. And it's easy to forget. And that's why it's important to surround ourselves with people who believe in us and love us, right? People who can like lift us up instead of tearing us down. Because we can do better. And sometimes the only thing that's really stopping us is that voice inside our heads that says we can't. So make sure that you surround yourselves with people who remind you that you can. Are you struggling with this in your life, whatever it might be? Like, that's fine. We all struggle. We'll struggle together and we'll get better together. Because we can fill our lives with light as opposed to darkness. So 5 simple things. We can talk about them now if you'd like. 5 little keys to building healthy habits. Start small and start easy, whatever it is, spiritual habits, physical habits, whatever it is. Number 2, come up with solutions for problems ahead of time. Be mindful that you will trip along the way. So plan ahead so you can have a plan B. Don't let yourself get discouraged in that moment. Number 3, give yourself rewards for good activities. Understand what your heart actually needs in that moment and give yourself a healthy reward as opposed to an unhealthy reward. Number 4, focus on building good habits, not breaking bad ones. Don't fight against the darkness. Flood your life with light. And number 5, believe you can do better. Because sometimes we can be our own worst enemy, and we need people to make sure that we get boosted up as opposed to torn down. So this is very practical. You can use this in a variety of different ways. Life is hard, but we can depend on each other and like lean on each other to hopefully do better. So I hope some of that was helpful. If anything was not clear, we can talk about it now. Lord our God, we thank you for the blessing of coming together. You promised that where 2 or 3 are gathered in your name, there you are. Thank you for having been with us. Continue to be with us, even as we exit our little Zoom boxes and go back to our rooms and our homes and our dorms. Help us to reflect on what we've learned together. Help us to take our small, achievable next step to draw closer to you, whether a deeper prayer rule or a deeper ascetic practice or a deeper philanthropic practice, whatever it might be. Help us to do something small, but something that will begin to further open up our hearts and make space for you and for all creation that we may carry with us. We ask this of you, O Lord, together with your Father, who is without beginning, and your all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and forever, and to the ages of ages.